Howdy rowdy. Okay. It's great. It was really great. Thank you for your howdy rowdy cheering. Good morning, everyone. Are you doing all right this morning? Are you hanging in there? Okay. Well, my name is Jay. If I've not met you, I'd love a chance to meet you. And I'm excited to continue in our series called Wired for Joy. If you've not been with us, let me just catch you up on some of what we've been doing. What we're doing in this whole series is looking at how the Bible has been teaching us for thousands of years that there are ways that God intends to interact with you to set your heart, your mind, your body at peace and at joy, no matter what else is going on around you. Scriptures have been teaching that for thousands of years, that you can be experiencing horrible suffering in your life, complete misery that's happening politically around you. Everything can be going wrong around you, and yet because of what God has done in Jesus Christ and the peace that he gives by his Spirit, you can experience that life and that freedom in the midst of everything that's a mess. That's what the Bible's been teaching for a very long time. And there's lots of people that are skeptical about that, or there's lots of people that maybe believe or know something about life with God, but don't really know something about life with God. Do you know anybody like that? Have you ever met a Christian who was a miserable person? Yes? If you haven't, it's probably you, because there's lots of them. And so what we've been looking at is how in the last 7 to 10 years, I mean, you could say a little bit longer, but really it's in the last 7 to 10, our ability to watch people's brains, like on brain scans, is a really interesting thing. You may or may not know this, but you're living in one of the most interesting times to be alive in so many different ways. But in one way is medically, we have these totally new scans that we can watch people's brains move in live action. Like when we have them think a thought, we can see where it shows up in their brain. When we have them process trauma, we can watch how their mind is working, like what parts of their brain fire. And what's so interesting about neuroscience and what we're able to study right now is things that the Bible have been teaching for thousands of years are now being backed up by active scientific data. That's pretty cool. And so what we're doing in this series is taking some ancient truths of the Bible, layering those against some of the modern neuroscience that we're learning and realizing, and talking about what that means for us as followers of Jesus, to be people that live out of a place of joy and peace and strength, no matter what else is going on in the world around us. Some of the things we've talked about, we've done weeks now, so I don't want to re-preach a bunch of sermons. You can always look on our podcasts, they're all there lined up. But some of the things we talked about is how one of the things we've learned about your brain, that I know about your brain and my brain, is that the center of your brain, like the kind of base camp of how your brain wants to work, is from a place of joy. As an infant, babies look for faces that will express joy to them. They're scanning, looking for a mom, a dad, people that will express that they're happy to see them. That's why when you look at a baby, you're supposed to like smile, and you can make a baby cry by just going, and then they'll cry, because they're wired, you've been wired to look for joy, that you bring joy to other people. When you walk into a room, you're watching for that. You might not know you are, but you are. And that's the right side of your brain. The right side of your brain scans 8 to 10, sometimes 12 times based on who you are, intuitively before you think one thought with the left side of your brain. So when you walk into a room like this morning, your brain, with your eyes, is scanning the room to tell, is this a safe place or is this a dangerous place? Is this a warm place? Is this a cold place? Are these people that want to see me, or are these people that I need to be nervous about? And that happens intuitively. You don't have to talk yourself into it. Actually, you can't even really talk yourself out of it. It just happens naturally. And the basic case that we've been making is that a lot of discipleship in church has been training people with the left side of their brain, meaning analytic truths about who God is and what Jesus is like, but is not translated often to the right side of people's brain. So what happens if you don't actually change and grow and transform in the way that you intuit the world? Well, if you don't have joy as a natural way of living and being, you're going to end up running off another fuel source, which is fear and anxiety. And what you're going to end up doing is every room that you're walking in, what you're really trying to gauge is threat, is danger. You're trying to watch for how scary this place might be, as opposed to being able to engage fully in a relaxed and vulnerable way. Now, there's some of you here this morning that are new people, and so you know this especially, like even right now as you're listening to me, you're like, what's this guy's angle? And that's normal. I would like to suggest that's normal. Like, we live in kind of a dangerous world, right? Like, when somebody tries to stop you on the street, and they're like, hey, can I just talk to you for a moment? If you've lived more than 10 minutes, you know this guy's trying to do something, right? Isn't that true? If you walk through Old Town Arvada, somebody says, hey, can I just share something with you for a few minutes? You are trying to get something from me. Isn't that accurate? How often is it that they're like, can I share something with you for 10 minutes? And they're like, I'd like to just give you some money. 0 times. That's how many times, right? So again, you are trained, there's habits you learn to try to protect yourself from a dangerous world. That thing that you look for as a baby, that you're looking for, you should be looking for the rest of your life, you've been trained that the world isn't really a safe place. And you have to be able to make educated guesses about who's there to help you and who's actually there to hurt you. And how do you begin to measure that and then act accordingly? It was a few years ago now, but there was a dude in the life of our church who got baptized. He gave his life to Jesus in the life of our church and got baptized. Some of you have been at baptism services here. We have a horse trough and, we line people up and we pray for them and we talk about baptism and we dunk people and then we pull them out of the water, which if you're not a follower of Jesus is just bizarre, right? There's not a lot of places you show up and be like, let's dunk people, and everyone will cheer. And not only do they cheer, they often cry. Like there's something powerful happening emotionally in that. And if you're here that somebody doesn't know Jesus and you're listening to that, you're like, how could that be? Well, it's because it symbolizes something. It symbolizes people giving their whole of their life to God, and then, they're dying effectively with Christ, and then raising to new life in Christ. And I'd go so far as to say God interacts in that somehow. There's power in it by the Holy Spirit, like his presence meets us in that. But right after baptism, I saw him in the lobby, and I said, so can I just ask you, why did you get baptized? He says, well, I've given my life to Jesus. I said, yeah, I know that. I know that part. But what actually helped you to come to know Jesus? And I was hoping he would say, your eloquent preaching. He didn't say that. I fished for it, but he didn't say it. What he said instead, and I thought then he would say, oh, it's kind of the worship and maybe the music, the experience. I had this encounter with God. Didn't say that either, though that does happen to people. As we just kept talking, he was kind of fumbling around because I could tell even in his own mind he wasn't sure intuitively. Like, I'm not really sure what kind of got me to this place. Have you ever had that experience where you're like, I don't know, I'm not sure how I got here. But the more we talked, what became clear, and what he said clearly was, being in this church was the first place that I didn't feel like I had to defend myself all the time. It was the first room I had been in, maybe in the course of my entire life, that I had the genuine experience that these people really do care for me. That strangers, their natural affect, people that didn't know me, their natural affect was they cared and wanted to support me, pray for me, and honestly see the best from my life. And he came from kind of a tough, rough life. He said, pretty much every room I'm in, other dudes especially are mean mugging every time you walk in a room. Guys might know what I'm referring to. Girls might not, right? Like you can be in rooms with strangers that are dudes, and the very first thing that they're trying to do is size you up and figure out, it's like they're presenting, I could probably beat you up if I want to. Anybody been with high school boys, middle school boys? Okay, so it's a vibe as much as anything, right? It's like a vibe. It's like a way you stand. It's a way you look at someone. It's as if, it's almost like animalistic, like from like, it's like this vibe, like, sup? You want some of this? You don't want this. You don't even say it. It's just a way of being, right, dude? So when you're in a room, when you're expecting people to sort of raise up like, hey, and instead they're like, hey, it's weird. He said, I didn't trust it. I've been here for months, and I just kept thinking, at some point here, somebody's going to try and jack me. Somebody's trying to do something. But over time, I began to realize, I think this is really who these people are. Joy, when truly experienced in a life with God, shows up on your face. It shows up in your affect. Followers of Jesus are to be people that the life of God transforms the way that they even stand, approach, or engage another human being. You see this all through the New Testament. All of this language of the New Testament is about love. I'm just going to read a bunch of the Bible at you in a row. Can you manage it? If you can't, too bad. It's coming anyway. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5, follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love. Walk in the way of love. This is God's example, that you walk in the way of love. Not just you think in the way of love, not you believe the right things about who God is, though you should also do those things. But that should translate in the way that you live your day-to-day life exudes the love of God. And we have all kinds of examples in the New Testament of people that walked in this manner. John, we just did 1 John not long ago as a sermon series, and John is one of those people that seems to walk in the way of love. I love when he's writing his second letter in 2 John, and he says this about people he's writing to. He's trying to instruct them, but in the middle of instructing, he says this. I love this. He says, I have much to write to you, but I don't want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face so that our joy may be complete. He's like in the middle of writing, and he's like, this is getting boring. I actually just want to stop writing, and I want to figure out how I can sit with you so you can look at my face and see the joy that I have for you, and that's going to make my joy complete, and that's going to make your joy complete. I can't wait for 10 years from now when we actually get to see the long-term studies on the effect of COVID on our country. One of the effects of COVID is the fact that we didn't get to look at each other face to face for a while. And the impact on how that created and maintained anxiety in people's lives, specifically on kids. I mean, the amount of kids that were just sort of young in COVID, and you can watch them trying to figure out how to be with humans again. Some of you hear that and you're going, kids, how about me? I don't know how to be with humans again. Even watching a room like this, when we came together, there were two extreme reactions. Some people were like, I can't wait to be together. There's like way too much hugging. For me, I don't like being touched that much, if I'm honest. But then other people were like, it's kind of awkward to re-engage. Did anybody experience those two experiences with people even coming out of COVID? And I would like to suggest, being a pastor, watching how people began to think somehow video church would offer transformation is a false view of how God actually meets with you, because he meets with you in spaces with people face to face. You're not transformed by information. You're transformed by engagement with God and his people. That's the case that we're trying to make over these weeks. So he says, I just can't wait to be with you. I love the way Paul, we read it a moment ago, as he talks about the Philippians, says, I thank my God every time I remember you, and all my prayers For all of you, I pray with joy. I always pray with joy. You get this impression when Paul says, I just remember you. I think about you, and my face lights up. I just think, if that we have the little phrase, absence makes the heart grow fonder. I mean, aren't there people that you haven't been with in a while? And just the thought of them, the thought of seeing them, the anticipation of seeing them makes you like, oh man, that's going to be so great. I can't wait to see them. I love, I travel a decent amount. I love flying and coming up like that little escalator and seeing people with their signs that are like greeting family and friends from a distance. And it's like every person that comes up, it's like I get 1/2 second where I get to see the joy that they have, and it feels like it's for me. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're coming up and you make eye contact, and they're like, oh, not him. And they look past, but you get 1/2 second where you're like, oh, I'm glad to see you. Oh, it's not me. Okay, that's fine. Glad you're happy to see somebody. And then every once in a while, that person was just like right behind you or right in front of you. And it's a fascinating thing to experience even when you're near it, because even watching it happen, you get sort of a wash of the feeling, don't you? Strangers, people don't even know. And you even watch some people like stop and watch, like, oh, this is great. They just, the experience of people genuinely, and here's what it is, delighting in one another. The joy they express with their bodies, with their faces. They haven't even said anything. It's like through the glass sometimes. If you've not been to a wedding recently, we all get to watch this, don't we? When you watch the bride come along, what happens when the bride enters the room? You look at the bride, that's kind of cool. But where do you look next? You always look at the groom. And you can watch his face change when he sees her come around. And you watch him straighten up. And like the toughest guy starts to cry. Right? And then you watch the dad. His face is more confusing. It's usually a mixture of things, which is also pretty intense. Especially if you're a dad, you look at the dad. You're like, oh, that poor guy. This is hard for him. Right? All of that stuff has been already spoken to us in the scriptures. One of the most powerful benedictions in all of the Bible is, the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and give you peace. You want one more Bible verse? I'm going to give you one more, whether you want it or not. Acts chapter 2, the new believers, first followers of Jesus, who have an encounter with the Holy Spirit. There's this sermon given. 3,000 people come to know Jesus at the same time, and they're baptized. It says this in Acts chapter 2. All the believers were together. They had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God. The very next verse, verse 47. Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Okay, so it describes them as being sacrificial, worshiping together, thinking about the Bible together, eating together, and they're happy. They enjoy one another. They enjoy life with God because they're deeply connected because of this thing that God has done for them in Jesus Christ. And I guess if I were just going to give you one thought today that I'd like you to consider, it would be simply this. Can you imagine the impact in our society if followers of Jesus were known, instead of known for anger or fear or political positions, they're known primarily for joy? If follower of Jesus, you could spot a follower of Jesus because they were a person who was filled with joy and peace and like hope And you could tell not just by the way they talked, but by even the way they looked, at the way that they could square their body and allow the delight that they've experienced with God, because we've been talking about that a lot, that what it is to have a life with God is to know that He delights in you, that you have encounters with His presence, that there's ways you can place yourself under that spigot, so to speak, and experience the presence of God, but then that you turn and you allow that delight to pour into other people. The real joy and the hope of God. How does Jesus say they will know that the world will know that we are His disciples? By their love for one another. This is how they'll know. By the love you have for one another. Not by your right theological belief, though that's helpful. Not by, your servant-heartedness. And it's interesting to me as I travel around the world, how many other places in the world understand this in a way that in the West and the U.S. we really don't. If you've ever been amongst the African church, there's like a different way of worship, or Southeast Asia, or South America. Like when they worship with their whole bodies, their whole faces, their whole lives. There's a kind of joy that exudes out of the people of God in these places that, frankly, I find in short supply in a lot of the Western world. It's like we've been muted somehow in our whole life, and so then even our life with God kind of feels muted in the same manner. I remember I was with a group of African pastors, Southeast Asian pastors, South American pastors, and with some American pastors, and they were having a theological kind of little argument. And so the way that the American tried to win the argument is he showed a little clip from a Western pastor preaching kind of a theological set of stuff, and then we were kind of all huddled around watching it. And it was a well-orchestrated, eloquent argument, right? Like, and this is what this means about God, and this is what this means about Jesus, and this Bible verse is being misinterpreted in this way or that way. And the Africans and they're all kind of staring, listening to this argument. And then we kind of had a break, and I was off talking to an Ethiopian pastor after, and he said to me, what do you think of that argument? I said, I think it's pretty cogent. It makes sense to me. He said, yeah, but I'm not sure that guy's a Christian who preached. He looks miserable. And I couldn't argue with him. He did look pretty miserable. But what struck me was his natural way of understanding if someone was actually a follower of Jesus was, do they exude a kind of joy and a kind of hope, a kind of life that should come with knowing that you are delighted in by a God who has made a way for you in Jesus Christ. That was just a natural thought for him. It turns out the scientific world is learning a very similar thing. I'll give you one example. There was a guy who did a series of experiments that sadly aren't as well known as they need to be, specifically in addiction research. In the 1970s, a guy named Bruce Alexander, he was studying some old addiction studies and experiments that was done with rats and pigeons, where both rats and pigeons, if you kind of set them up in an experiment, where with pigeons it was like there were two pedals. One would give them food, the other one would give them food in like a burst of pleasure into like this electrode that was hooked in their brain. And I bet you can guess what happened. The pigeon would just keep hitting the pleasure food lever over and over and over until actually they experienced so much pleasure it killed them. And they did a similar experiment with rats, where one bit of water had cocaine and heroin in it, in water, and the other one had no cocaine and heroin. And then they just let the rats decide which thing they wanted to drink from. And can you make a guess on which one they drank from a lot? I bet you can. The cocaine and heroin. They just drank from that all the time until literally it killed them. They just died. So the prevailing theory at the time was this is what addiction is. Addiction is that if you create quick hits of pleasure, then that people will kill themselves. if that's available to them. And so the main means by which we manage addiction is by snuffing people's need or desire for pleasure. And this is why we kind of create separative things, and addiction therapy was working in that manner. And Alexander saw these things, and he thought, this doesn't seem complete to me. There must be something else going on here. So he made a contra experiment that was similar by way of the conditions, but he added some things. And here's what he created. He created what is called Rat Park 1 for rats, which had like tubes and, really good food around the rats. And the rats were in community, so they just had tons of sex and lots of cool food and lots of ways to play, and it was brightly lit, and then they had nice little places they could sleep that were comfortable and warm. And so he made like a little rat paradise, but it was in community. And the same waters were there, the heroin and the cocaine water and the other water. And you know what they discovered? The rats would go to the cocaine water here and there, but hardly ever. Because the need for pleasure was being satiated in community, in a way of being together. That is not a small thing to learn. It turns out, when we look at recovery in humans, it's not all that different. So much of what you are trying to stop in your life, that needs to be different, will often be solved by having a deep connection with God and having a deep connection with others. Nearly everything we know about addiction recovery now tells us that the relationships you have vulnerably with other people are essential to long-term recovery. In other words, we can get you to stop certain kinds of behaviors by just stopping them. Like, sorry, you're not allowed to be near this thing. That'll work to a degree, but really all that happens is that desire in you will just continue to grow. And this is why we have binging with different, some of you right now should think of your diets, right? That's why you binge. It's because that desire grows and then you just do something else. What you need is another way of lifestyle, and nearly everything we know neurologically about people is you need to have connection with others that enable you to feel delighted in such a way that you don't get that need met somewhere else. This is why, and I think I can say this with theological certainty, dogs are better than cats. There's no question here, guys. This is theologically accurate. When I come home, I have a dog and a cat. My dog loves me. He delights in me. I see it as he looks at me. Cat just sort of looks at me, sort of bored and disinterested. One is the will of God for my life. The other is the enemy. I saw a sign recently that said this in front of a church: Lord, help me to be the person my dog thinks I am. I do think that that's something to aspire to, and we've all known the difference. We know the difference. You've had friends call, if you call a friend, there's certain kinds of friends you call them, and the way they answer is, what's up, what do you need? Instead of like, man, it's so good to hear from you. Married couples, can I just give you one experiment to try this week? Here it is. The first 2 minutes you see each other and the last 2 minutes you see each other before you do something are really, really important. That when you've not seen each other and you see each other again, to square up and show delight with your life, with your body, with your face. When someone comes home from work, when you first see each other the first time, to square up and show warmth. And when someone's about to leave, it's like, I'm heading out. It's like, see ya. That doesn't work. To square up and say, hey, give me a hug. I love you. Have a great day today. That 1 minute, that 30 seconds transforms the way your brain processes that relationship and will change the way you think about the whole day. This is true in your friendships. This is true in church. This is true in marriage. This is true in every way. You have to show with your body, with your voice, with your face that you delight in one another because your brain is watching for it. I'll give you an exercise you can do this week. Every single time we've tried to give you something, and then we'll be done. Here's what I want you to consider doing this week. I've changed the name. I'm calling it the I'm Not Dead Yet exercise. Some of you know what movie that's from. I'm not dead yet. I'd like you to imagine for, let's say, just a good friend in your life. You can do it for your spouse if you want. What do you imagine if they were to die now, you would want to say at their memorial? What story would you want to tell? What attributes would you want to say in front of people about their life? Even if you think about that, you're going to start to get emotional. That thing that I just talked about where Paul says, when I think about you, I'm full of joy. Because we don't think about people enough to allow that to center into us. But think about someone you really care about, and if it was their memorial, what would you say? And what I'd like to suggest is you should probably be telling that to them now. You should probably tell your friend now. You should probably tell your spouse now. I don't know about you, but I don't find that people ever are encouraged enough. Have you ever had any moment in your life where you're like, please don't encourage me. I'm so encouraged. I'm not sure what I would do if I had more encouragement. I'd probably burst. Never. The world is so dark, and the pain is so real. The criticism is constant in our lives, isn't it? Healthy marriages, according to the Gottman Institute, it's 4 key compliments for every 1 pessimistic or critical word. That's what a healthy marriage looks like. 4 to 1. Unhealthy marriages go the other way around. That is in your power to do. And listen, don't do it in the cheap way you see kids do, where you're like, you have to encourage them since you said something. You have nice shoes, cool hat. Take some time. Do the I'm not dead exercise. I'm telling you, if you do this with every key person in your life, I will bet you almost anything that you'll see the thickness of your relationships grow. You can do that in a letter, but I would highly recommend you do it face to face. There's some things I know about you, I believe about you, that I don't think I've ever said to you, that I appreciate. There's this one story, there's this attribute about you that I really appreciate, and I just want to let you know, I appreciate our friendship. I appreciate you, Mom. I appreciate you, Dad. I appreciate you, my brother or my sister. And I wanted to tell you this. I will bet you anything it will change. And it's like a spigot. When you start to open that spigot, it flows very naturally. You might become the kind of person that easily delights in others. And they know it because you've known the delight of the Lord and you easily delight in others. Can you imagine a group of people that chose to be like that all the time? Those people might change the world.